Hey, what's going on? It's Scott. Yes, I'm in a hotel room because I just got done speaking at a conference. But have you ever wondered what goes on behind the scenes at an internal affairs unit? Well, I found just the man to interview retired LAPD Sergeant Marlon Marrache, and he worked internal affairs at LAPD for a very long time. And I asked him a lot of questions. Let's get right to the interview. You'll enjoy this.
Are internal affairs police officers?
Yes, but they're sergeants. So majority of internal affairs, not just in California, but across the nation should be police sergeants. And the
What?
reason being is because you're a manager. I mean, imagine if you're a police officer working internal affairs and you have an accused employee as a sergeant. Well, you're his subordinate. That's probably not going to work.
Point. Very good point.
Basically, my job was to prosecute, represent the chief of police, and to ensure that we have precise, thorough, detailed, complete investigation. And unfortunately, it wasn't like that all the time when we receive these type of cases. We, as advocates, is what they call us, associate advocates, got cases that weren't really that strong to begin with. So sometimes we just had to take the orders and say, hey, go to this hearing. So we would gather with the defense attorneys and, have a really good relationship in doing these hearings. And at times, it's kind of like we went through the motions, only because the investigation just lacked a lot of quality.
Okay.
And so I did about 30 plus of these border rights hearings. Out of the 30, 5 of them were righteous, 100% firings and terminations as a result. And you and I can agree that we don't want a bad actor, and they rightfully deserve to get fired. But what I always questioned myself was those other 25, meaning what happened to all the levels of review to the point where it got to the associate advocate to put on this border rights hearing, and come to find out that a lot of those cases just didn't really belong there. The experience that I've gotten is that not just LAPD, but every disciplinary system that you can analyze or examine just throughout the United States and any police agency, it lacks some sort of a good checks and balances.
Oh,
and that's,
okay.
kind of unfortunate, because what ends up happening is that the one who suffers the most is the accused employee, because you leave him or her, in the dark. You can agree, and I'm sure you've experienced where you had a partner who was facing an IA, and all of a sudden the rumor mill start, and they treat him or her as if they committed some felony and like a suspect. It's just very unfortunate. But as these decades have gone by, we are trying to get better to trying to fine tune this big, disciplinary machine. So that's been my experience with LAPD, but also with the Los Angeles Police Department. They actually have an entire unit to represent officers, to actually defend officers. And a lot of my duties and responsibilities, no any different than a union rep, was for officers to give us a call at officer rep section and pretty much say, you know what? Hey, I just got an IA, I just got served, and I really feel like these sustained allegations it's not true. I didn't do this. I think that the department got it wrong. Hey, Sarge, can you please do a full, blown investigation, examination, and analyze this, and let me know if I'm actually wrong. And 9 times out of 10, well, I shouldn't give it 90%, but certainly over 50% of those cases, when they called, yes, internal affairs didn't get it right. And so that service we provided for the officers. So the admin appeal process has a lot to do with you being served. Yeah, you guys have Garrity. We have Skelly here in the state of California. Basically, when you get served, just as an example, you get 2 allegations and they're sustained for neglect of duty, and you feel as though this is not what happened. This shouldn't be sustained. It should be unfounded, right? Unfounded means it didn't happen. Sustained means that it occurred. And so you come to officer rep section, and as a defense rep, you come to me and I'll look at the entire case, and we can do 2 things. We can do a written response, a Skelly or a Garrett response, Skelly hearing, whatever you want to call it. And, let the power to be read it. And if they change their mind, then great. We're going to switch it from sustained to unfounded. Or you can actually go through a little bit of a mini hearing where, again, it's kind of like a civil trial, but you only have one hearing officer, and you present your case, and you're trying to convince this hearing officer that, hey, the department got it wrong, and we should make this unfounded, and here are the reasons why. And if that hearing officer says, okay, I'm going to rule in your favor, defense, that hearing officer still has to go to the chief to convince the chief and pretty much say that the department got it wrong. I ruled in favor of the defense. It's non-binding. Chief, with your permission, we're asking you to change your mind and overturn these sustained allegations. So
what complaints, what allegations make it to internal affairs?
you're talking about the city of Los Angeles. I mean, at one point you had over 3,000 public complaints. I mean, that's a big machine,
Good
right?
gosh.
And at one time when I was in internal affairs, you must have had over 300 investigators in internal affairs. So the way it works is that you actually have a unit where they have sergeants and some police officers where they actually look at the face sheet, the intake, and they tell themselves, okay, this is not that serious. So you know what? We're going to resend it back to the division and let them handle it
Okay.
because it's not that serious. Or, well, this one kind of involves criminal offenses. You know what? We're going to keep it here in internal affairs, give it to an experienced IO investigating officer, and he or she can go ahead and investigate.
What were some of the most challenging cases you heard as an internal affairs officer, and how did you resolve them?
In my position as an advocate, putting on these border rights, it's got to be false statements.
Mm-hmm.
And false, dishonesty, perjury, misleading statements, probably, well, I shouldn't say probably, they definitely are, as you can tell from my lens as an advocate, the best bang for your buck.
And you're
because
talking,
those are
and you're talking false statements, perjury by the officers, right?
absolutely.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, you are being accused and alleged that you lied, and that you committed perjury or you misled the investigator. And so when you start talking about those particular type of allegations, in my experience, you really have to be completely certain that you have enough evidence, you meaning the department, has substantial amount of evidence to be able to prove that the officer did in fact commit a false statement. The challenge has been that the investigation, as I get it and I'm reading it and I'm doing a full examination, hasn't always been that we've had substantial amount of evidence.
Mm-hmm.
So just to kind of give you a little bit of a background about the standard of proof, we know that it's preponderance of the evidence, right? So preponderance is 51%. So it's more likely than not. So what the department's position is that you more likely than not actually lied during an official investigation, or you lied somehow, some way throughout this whole IA process. However, when we start talking about lying, what we like to do, we meaning internal affairs, we like to crank that 51% to like 90. I mean, you got to crank it all the way up and have a substantial amount of evidence to prove that you actually lied. And it's not just Scott telling me that I was here on Walk and Don't Walk, and then your partner happens to say that you were not there. That's not substantial enough. That's like, for me, in my experience, will be like maybe 40, 45%.
Okay.
There better be like 4 other witnesses and maybe some other types of evidence to say that Scott was not on Walk and Don't Walk like he said he was. It's just kind of an example.
How long does an internal affairs investigation take?
Very good question. So by law, you have 1 year from the date of the uninvolved supervisor that is aware of alleged misconduct to investigate it, adjudicate it, and be served. So it has to be within that 1 year from the date of the uninvolved supervisor being aware of alleged misconduct. Sometimes it can take 3 months, sometimes it can take 6.
But unfortunately, with the shortage and everything that's going on,
In my experience with LAPD, and you're looking at about the 10th or the 11th month.
Obviously, when it comes to you receiving information, you receiving cases, you're already working for a department that you have to hold yourself to a very high standard. I mean, people think transparency, honesty, accountability. So how do you maintain that standard?
For the most part, you have a good heart, you have good intentions, and if you're out there doing God's work to the best of your abilities, you shouldn't have anything to worry about.
That's what I always
happens
say.
is,
That was what was told to me when I started, and it's pretty easy.
Honestly, it is.
Yeah.
And I think we kind of forgotten about that. I think what ends up happening is that maybe we have like some old school field training officers that for whatever reason, they think of internal affairs as, the rat squad or, the dark side, or they're bad people, evil people. And so don't like reveal everything. Or if you did something wrong, probably the best way to approach it is to conceal deceit and don't tell the truth, where maybe you do have some field training officers that do say, hey, you know what, fall on the sword and just let them know. We always ask, and this, for officers when they come on this profession to be what? Forthcoming, forthright, truthful, and honest. And it's really that simple.
Yeah.
Just because we got body worn video in 2015 doesn't change the game, doesn't change the concept of policing. It's just another way of being transparent and you know, and having some integrity. And
Yeah.
so for any young officer, for anyone who's listening, just, hey, if you feel like you did something wrong, then you know what? Be approachable. You know, go talk to your sergeant and let them know what is it that you felt that you did something wrong. You and I can agree that any application of a use of force, come on, it's not pretty. It's just things happen, and I'm here to tell you from experience, there's a likelihood that you're going to deviate. You're probably going to deviate from what you were taught in the academy, or even if you had an updated, you know, tactical application course. There's a strong possibility when you're out in the streets and you're effecting an arrest, you know, you're trying to overcome a suspect's resistance, or whatever the case may be, where you're gonna deviate, and that deviation might be substantial. So the question is, can you justify your actions? And I
Right.
think that's where we kind of, you know, fall, you know, off the tracks a little bit, is that we don't really have a good way to articulate our actions and be, you know, show your emotions and be natural and say, yeah, you know, this guy was coming at me with a knife, man, 2 more feet. And next thing you know, I would have been dead, you know, and I want to go see my family, you know. The other challenge is that, and this has happened too, and you know this, is that even if you do the right thing, or you think in your mind you are doing the right thing, you're being proper, you're being respectful, and you're being honest, and what you did in a matter of 2 seconds was what you believed in your heart was the right thing to do, then here comes a department scrutinizing you, and next thing you know, you might end up in an IA, and certainly that doesn't feel good at all.
And you just mentioned the things you like you just did about, you know, there's no need to be deceiving and hold stuff back, and it's not worth it ever. And I just had Jessica Walsh with Blue to Gold training. She's a prosecutor in with the Clark County's district attorney's office in Las Vegas, and she was even talking about, you know, if whatever you know in court, you have to share it. Like, don't hold anything back. And one, that's also you're committing a criminal act if you know, withhold something. But it's very important. But it's amazing how it's all for the same goal, to help police do that much better for the public and set themselves up for success.
100% spot on. I would only add also that when I teach at Savage Training Group, as a law enforcement instructor, I teach an internal affairs course. It's a 2-day course. Day one is IAs, how to do an IA from beginning to end. And day two is officer involved shooting, OIS's investigations. My partner, Sergeant James Tacchini, does a great job in doing that. And we both really focus and convey to the students, which the majority of them are new sergeants, some of them are tenured sergeants, some lieutenants, and maybe sometimes we even get command staff, that, hey, if you're going to be in this type of business, this type of function, these are the kinds of processes that you need to do. You know, there's do's and don'ts, there's pros and cons to everything. There's no right and wrong, but at the very least, and my mantra has always been, no stone goes unturned. In other words, if you're going to be an IA investigator, do right by the officer, right? I know that sounds a little biased or contradicting, but look, if I'm investigating Scott, and I've known Scott for 15 years and we've worked together for 10 of those 15 years, I just know Scott with these outrageous allegations, it's just not true. So I'm going to do everything that I can. No stone goes unturned. Just really investigate every single lead to try to exonerate Scott. Because here's the deal. If the evidence leads me to believe that, oh my gosh, you know what, I should be in a state of shock if Scott did commit, you know, these type of allegations. But that is so important for a lot of sergeants because that's a position. You're a manager, you know, you have a lot of influence on your subordinates, on your officers, and you certainly have to look up to your bosses, and they have to make sure that, you know, you're, you know, you got that leadership where you're doing everything right. So that's the type of police function part that I felt just wasn't really being talked about on any podcast.
So I did want to kind of get to those who particularly my YouTube audience, there are those that are interested in the profession and those who are new to the profession. There's going to be a lot of policies that can actually be taxing, trying to remember all the policies at a department. I remember when I started in 2007, they handed me a big notebook and I thought, wow, this is a lot to read, but I read it. Now they're so big, you can't keep it in a notebook. They literally have to put it on a hard drive on the computer. Now, obviously, officers are held accountable per policy and state law, but what advice do you give to officers who, I mean, they literally are max brain capacity when it comes to policies?
Well, two for sure that what I would consider your Bible, like the law enforcement Bible. Definitely know your peace officer's rights. That's something that you have to know. Because I'm a true believer that somewhere in your career, especially if you're working out in the streets, you're going to do something or something's going to happen at a radio call or a traffic stop or a pedestrian stop where you're going to be scrutinized, especially if you apply force.
Yes, 100%.
And right. And at some point you're going to be judged, and that judgment and that scrutiny might result in an IA. And so, you know what, whatever state you're in, or whoever's listening and watching, you have to know your peace officer's right. That's if that state has peace officers' bill of rights. So if you do, download it and read it. Just one paragraph a day, and just ask a lot of questions, and then call your union attorney and have a Q&A, just so you have a really good understanding about what your rights are. So that would be the first part of the Bible. Your second part of the Bible is definitely know your use of force policy.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you don't even look, when I was in the academy back in 1999, 835 APC, the California Penal Code, all I knew, and to this very day, well, up until I got to Savage Training Group and I really was educated about
right.
835 APC, is I always knew three things. If you're going to use force, you can only use it in the following: effect an arrest, prevent an escape, and overcome resistance. And that's all I've known for like 20 years on my police career. But guess what? Laws and policies change all the time. Here in California, Assembly Bill 392 completely revamped the use of force policy. Not just the use of force policy, the use of deadly force as well. So now you really have to know what factors come into play when you're pulling the trigger. And it's a long read. And here's the other challenge. It's not so much that you can just grab and read it. You're going to have to read it and really like pull the curtains back and say, okay, what does this legislation mean by this? You know, and have a Q&A with an expert and know that, because the more you talk about it and the more you exercise it in your mind, there's a strong possibility that when the shit goes down, you're probably going to have, I don't know, if you read it for an hour, you might absorb maybe 10 minutes of that. Yeah. And that 10 minutes that you absorb, because, our retention is just horrible. Yeah. You might make a good decision.
Yeah, true.
So those are the two aspects of what I consider the law enforcement Bible: your peace officer's bill of rights and your use of force policy. You have to know those things.
Well, I appreciate it very much.